मैडम आपनकर WhatsApp रे पठेली देखंतु हैला
92 have joined already. 94 have joined. Yeah.
I'll just get my water for myself. Just a minute.
Yeah, that is important.
Yeah, I also have to.
Yes. Let me also get some water for myself. Yes.
Yeah, it's 2 hours, no? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, everybody with their bottles of waters. How are things there in your place? Things are very bad where I stay in Kolkata.
Yeah, here also it's raining heavily, lot of tree falling, lot of
ठीक है आरंभ करेंगे तो हाँ ठीक है ओके सर ठीक है हाँ
torrential rain we have. Yeah.
Where is ASHA?
ASHA, I think she's thrown out. System is like.
She's not to be seen, and now she's back.
I had put off my video.
Yeah.
Yes, ASHA.
So I think we should start. It's time. More than 100 participants have already joined, and they will be joining because it is never on time in India IST. So we should start.
And also technology.
This is a new kind of experience for many of our participants, especially from outside.
And they are unable to log also. Sometimes in certain parts it's difficult. Yeah, for them.
Okay, madam. Okay. So let's start.
Yeah.
Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Ishan Kumar Patro, distinguished speakers, Professor ASHA Hans, Professor Ishita Mukhopadhyay, Professor Vibhuti Patel, and Professor Mary John, faculty and students from Ravenshaw University, and also from other institutions of the state as well as outside, dear participants, a very warm welcome to you all. On behalf of the Center for Women's Studies of Ravenshaw University, this is the first kind of initiative we're taking in the context of this pandemic. I'd like to extend a special welcome to all our distinguished speakers because in spite of their busy schedule, they have accepted an invitation and have expressed their willingness to be a part of this webinar. I also welcome our Vice Chancellor, Professor Ishan Kumar Patro. Now, coming to this topic of assessing the impact of the corona COVID-19 pandemic through the gender lens, let me just begin by saying that this COVID-19 virus doesn't differentiate between the male and female bodies for the sake of infection. However, its socio-economic impact has never been gender neutral. But what we find that this pandemic has been declared as a disaster for gender justice. It has not only exposed the gender inequalities, but it has also accentuated them. However, we find that most of the narratives or the public discourse around this COVID-19 pandemic has been gender blind. A recent study has shown that at least 4 out of 10 women have lost their jobs due to this pandemic, and what we are witnessing in this current scenario has been described by an economist as a C-cession. So not only in terms of employment or livelihood, but also as far as access to food and access to healthcare, reproductive healthcare, and also the food and nutritional security, access to sanitation, etc. has definitely, this COVID-19 pandemic has serious repercussions. Now, there has been a surge in domestic violence, which led it to be described as a shadow pandemic by the UN Women. The stay home, stay safe tagline has actually brought out an irony in the sense that many women have been forced to stay in home with their abusers or the perpetrators of violence. So this lockdown has resulted in not only women being locked in, but also down. And but as I've already said, there has not been much serious thought regarding its implications for women. So we have a very distinguished panel to navigate, to help us to navigate through these issues. That is how this COVID-19 pandemic has impacted women in various ways. Now I take this opportunity to give a brief introduction of our distinguished guests, at least for the sake of the students. I know it will really take a very long time if I really introduce them, but so I would be very brief. Our first speaker for today's webinar is Professor Mary John. So she's an alumnus of JNU, and also she has a PhD from University of California, Santa Cruz. Currently, she is a professor at the Center for Women's Development Studies. She was a director of this particular center from 2006 to 2012. Prior to that, she was associated with JNU in the capacity of associate professor and also joint director of the Center for Women's Studies. Now, our next speaker is Professor Ishita Mukhopadhyay. She is currently the Professor of Economics and also the former Director of Women's Studies Research Center at University of Calcutta. She is also the coordinator of the Eastern region of Indian Women's Indian Association for Women's Studies. Now we have our next speaker, Professor ASHA. Professor ASHA is the founder director of School of Women's Studies, as well as former professor of political science at Utkal University. She has really left deep imprints on the evolution and the strengthening of the women's studies as an academic discipline in Odisha. She is also the co-chair of Pakistan India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy. Currently, she is the president of one organization, Samsrishti, which has been doing tremendous work in various fields, including the gender issues. Our final speaker is Professor Vibhuti Patel. She is an alumnus of University of Mumbai, and also she is currently associated with as a professor with Advanced Center for Women's Studies and in School of Development Studies of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Prior to that, she was working as a professor of economics in SNDT University, Mumbai, which has the distinction of not only being the first women's university in India, but also in the East Asia. All our distinguished speakers have received critical acclaim for their publications. I'm not going into the details of it. In addition to their stellar scholarship, they have also they are also known for their passionate activism. So we are really fortunate to have these distinguished speakers in our midst. I don't really need to introduce our beloved Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Ishan Kumar Patra. In addition to being actually a very distinguished neuroscientist, not only also well known abroad, being at the helm of this institute really galvanizes a community towards excellence. We are grateful to you, sir, for your presence. With these, once again, I welcome all of you to this webinar. Now I hand over this platform to Dr. Bikram Keshari Misra to carry forward the proceedings. Dr. Misra, please.
Thank you, Madam. Esteemed Vice Chancellor, the Chair of the day, esteemed resource persons, Professor Mary Joan, Professor Ishita Mukhopadhyay, Professor ASHA Hans, Professor Vibhuti Patel, delegates and participants from across the country. A very good morning to all of you. I am indeed grateful to Professor Ashima Sahu, the Director of the Center for Women's Studies, Professor of Political Science, and Dean School of Social Sciences for giving me this opportunity to coordinate this session. We have with us scholars in gender studies from across the country. Already, Madam has given the introduction. Professor Mary Joan, who was in JNU, who was in DU, and currently she's in CWDS. And Vibhuti Madam, who is a practicing gender specialist in TEAS. Professor ASHA Hans, she was the founder, director, Center for Women's Studies. And Ishita Madam, she is a practicing gender expert in Calcutta University. Indeed, we are honored with this galaxy of intellectuals. There can be no better way of having a discussion on analyzing the impact of gender COVID-19 on women than this. Without making more delay, I now humbly request Professor Mary Joan to share her webinar lecture with us. Thank you, Madam.
Good morning. First, let me thank Shaw University for inviting me to be part of this panel discussion. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Mishra, Asima, and all those who I know have worked very hard, the ones behind the screens today who are doing everything to make this possible. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and I look forward to a very good discussion on a very, this is what we are living with. We are trying to reflect on a situation that is unfolding day by day. Never before, I think, have any of us been in such a situation. And never before have we had to reflect and try and assess the situation that we are in. I mean, I just want to emphasize how unique this is in every way, and the extent to which, indeed, this is not something anticipated. This is not something in which we have the answers. This is not something in which even the scientists are in control, let alone political leaders. So we are all finding our way here. We are all trying to put to use as best as possible the, shall I say, the scholarship that we have, the reflective capacities that we have. And so we are learning all the time. For instance, so I thought I would begin just by mentioning that in being in the midst of this particular pandemic, this particular virus, we have suddenly become knowledgeable about prior pandemics. I, for one, did not know about the Spanish pandemic, the so-called Spanish flu of 1918. I don't know how many of you maybe were aware of it. This was a flu that ravaged the world after World War I, and possibly, and it's largely been forgotten by history. Even though it affected 1/3 of the world's population, that's the estimate, 500 million people, it killed 1/10 of those people, at least 50 million. It killed many in our own country. It killed people in the city of Bombay. It killed people in Bangalore, in my own hometown. And yet somehow it has been submerged from our memory compared to the present one which we are living through, and so on. So I just thought to compare, in a way, what we are living through today is actually not, in terms of its severity, in terms of epidemic severity, is not supposedly as severe as that pandemic was. That pandemic took 1/10 of our lives. Here it is very toddlers, infants. That is not the pattern here. In fact, curiously, this particular, even though, as I think Asima mentioned, the pandemic, today's pandemic doesn't choose who it's going to infect. Nonetheless, it is true that the ones who seem to be most affected in terms of comorbidities are in fact older men. It is older men who have fallen prey to this pandemic more than any other group. So in and of itself, you could say, in and of itself, this particular pandemic is not necessarily making the most vulnerable. That is to say, women and children are not necessarily the most vulnerable to the severity, to the fatality of this particular pandemic. But that, I think, only heightens what I think many of us are going to be discussing with all of you today, which is to say, in spite of the fact that it may not be targeting the very young, in spite of the fact that it may not be overtly targeting women, the disproportionate effects have indeed been very, very different. And so to begin with, and this is, I think, an unfortunate aspect which we must put on the table right away, we are not just living in the pandemic, we are also living in the efforts on the part of our governments, well-intentioned efforts, no doubt, to deal with the pandemic. And our government chose to put in place, in the end of March, it chose to put in place a lockdown, what has been called a lockdown. Commentators tell us that, in fact, India decided to put in the most severe lockdown of any country in the world. In some cities, it was a lockdown that was announced with barely 3 hours of notice. So some commentators have, in fact, said this is not so much a lockdown, it's a curfew, right? It's an emergency curfew. It should be called a curfew. And it is something that is more associated with a law and order problem than with a health problem. And the reason I'm putting this on the table is that the impacts that we are looking at, many of the impacts that we're looking at are as much a consequence of the ways in which the lockdown was implemented as with the ways in which we have to deal with a pandemic of this nature. So what we are dealing with cannot necessarily be disentangled from the nature of that lockdown. And those of you who are, going to be speaking about the nature of the migration crisis that emerged, that cannot be put down to the pandemic alone. That has to be also put down to the way in which the state decided to respond. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point is that it's very curious that it sometimes takes a moment of this sort where the whole world is brought to a standstill by a pandemic. Never before has this happened. It has the strange effect of, and I think it was Arundhati Roy who said, it has the effect of being like an X-ray. It turns an X-ray on society. And you all know what X-rays are. X-rays reveal what is otherwise hidden. That is, the bone structure of the body is revealed, which otherwise is not available to us. And she called it an X-ray of Indian society, whereby she meant that the class structures that otherwise are hidden from view, when we are carrying out our everyday lives, it's not that we are unaware of the differences amongst us. It's not as though we are not aware of rich and poor, but we carry on with our lives. And hence we allow these things to sort of bypass us. Whereas having been quote unquote locked down, having been brought to a standstill and seeing literally unfold in front of us the disastrous consequences of the pandemic and the lockdown, it was as though the class structure of our society was suddenly revealed like an X-ray. Like the bone structure of the body, we suddenly saw those who were safe, so to say, those who are on the streets with nowhere to go. People who were, working in our homes, people who were hawking on the streets, whose livelihoods might have been more or less, precarious, suddenly they were with nothing. And suddenly they decided that the home they could only go to was the place to go to. So something was revealed and it was a shock. I think nobody will forget those images that were brought to us thanks to journalists of all these people, mainly men, some women, some children, trudging hundreds of miles. And I'm sure many, many of them were bound to the state of Orissa. Orissa is one of the states with a very high rate of outmigration. Many People from Orissa are serving the rest of India in so many different ways. So we were treated to something and we were shocked. We, I mean, middle class, was shocked by this image we had suddenly of an underclass, a working underclass, whom this pandemic and lockdown had rendered with nothing, homeless, with nowhere to go. However, like any image, like an X-ray image, the image of an X-ray is a very partial one because, you know, X-rays decide to show up the bone structure, but they don't show up other things inside our bodies. So similarly, and I think this will be very much a subject in today's discussions, there are other aspects of the fault lines of our society, the inequalities of our society, the hierarchies of society that in fact were not very visible even at this moment. So aspects of class were visible, but not gender necessarily, not caste, not community differences, not disability, not a whole range of structures that are equally central to the inequalities of our society. Those were not rendered immediately visible in this aftermath of the lockdown. And that is why I think it's such a good decision on the part of Raman Shaw to decide to focus on gender more specifically and to place gender then within this larger context of class and other forms of inequality and so on. So in the time available to me, I thought I would say something more than about gender itself. If we want to talk about an impact, if we want to discuss here what the lockdown and the pandemic have done or are doing, or we think they may be doing to gender relations in our country, then we need to have some idea of what gender relationships have been like before the lockdown. If we don't have a picture of the before, then how do we have the picture of the after? And so I thought I'd just mention on three broad fronts some elements of what we in the women's movement and as feminists and as scholars, what we had been talking about prior to when we had no clue that a pandemic was going to hit us. And there are three things that have been, for instance, have been part of my own concerns. The first is that of violence, harassment, and so on, which have been very much on our agenda ever since the beginning of the women's movement, since the Mathura rape case, since the dowry deaths of the late 1970s. But I think the question of violence took on a new charge and became very much more a public matter of discussion after the Delhi gang rape of 2012. We saw much more understanding, much more discussion, much more campaigning to end violence against women post-2012, post-December 16, 2012. And for me, it was something of an eye-opener because I had not been as centrally involved in campaigns against violence and I had not done any research on violence before 2012. So for me, what was an eye-opener when I looked at data sets as a researcher, I looked at the National Crimes Records Bureau data sets. And what was shocking to me was to discover, first of all, that rape is not the biggest crime in our record books. The biggest by far in terms of numbers are the crimes that come under 498A, cruelty by family members to the woman. By far, the largest crimes are performed by family members on women. That's the point number one. Point number two is that even though I salute Jyoti Singh and her courage and all that her rape enabled, her kind of rape is actually the rarest of the rare rapes. We are all socialized to think that's a stranger, somebody lurking after nightfall behind the bushes, that this is the greatest danger to a woman. We are all told never to speak to somebody we don't know. We're all told to come home early. In fact, hostels after the rape case closed their gates even earlier than they had before as a response to the Delhi gang rape. However, if we look at the data, if we look at police records, FIRs that are now in part of the NCRB, and I would encourage all of you to please look at this data. What was a shocker to me was that in 2013, the year after the rape, when I looked at this data, as much as 98% of all rapes are rapes known to the victim. A bare 2% of rapes that come to our police stations, and we're talking, by the way, of reported rapes. We're not talking about all the rapes in that take place about which we don't know. We're talking about reported rapes of those, barely 2% are of the kind of the Jyoti Singh, an unknown person to the victim. Everybody else is known in whatever shape or form, whether it be broadly within the kin group, whether it be a neighbor, whether it be a friend, whether it be your boss, whether it be a professor in your university. These are all known to you. People you love and trust are the greater causes of harm than the so-called unknown person. This for me was a big shock. I have to say I learned a great deal. So I'm putting this on the table so that we ask ourselves, this is the situation before the pandemic. This is the situation before the lockdown. What do we think will be the situation after? Why do we think that now that families and women are at home, now that women and girls are at home, they should be safe? When in fact, homes have never been the safest spaces for women, ever. Right? So I would invite, other speakers to dwell on this a little further. Secondly, one of the plus points, one of the few areas where in India we can think that things have been getting better is in the area of education. The gaps, the so-called gender gap in education has been steadily narrowing, even though we have still, in spite of a Right to Education Act and so on, we still have significant levels of dropouts starting at the primary level and of course much more at the secondary level. The point here is that these dropouts are roughly not very different when it comes to boys and girls. Boys are dropping out, girls are dropping out. Boys may be dropping out for different reasons, girls may be dropping out for different reasons, mostly having to do, unfortunately, with the way the education system is failing them in one way or the other, and the way in which families are not able to see a future for their sons and daughters. In higher education, I'm now looking at the All India Survey of Higher Education data, which tells us something about the enormous range of all those. This is data that actually covers all the universities and so on, and colleges and other technical institutes of our country. We have a very, very large system. It's the second largest in the world today. We have 26% of a gross enrollment ratio when it comes to girls and boys in the 18 to 23 year age group. And it might surprise everyone to know that as of 2019, girls have actually slightly, it's 26.8 or something when it comes to girls. It's 26.7 when it comes to boys. I'm talking about the gross enrollment ratio, the proportion of those in this 18 to 23 year age who are enrolled in some higher education institution. No doubt there are differences. No doubt there are more boys in professional degrees. No doubt there are many, many more in B.Ed colleges and so on. But even on your standard undergraduate college, and I don't know what Ravenshaw's data would be like. It would be very interesting to know. In many undergraduate institutions, in fact, there is parity. In the Delhi University where I live today, there are more girls than boys in Delhi University. Delhi University has about 2 lakh students. Okay, so this is a remarkable achievement. Young families want their girls and boys to get as much education as possible. The question in our minds must be, now what? What will happen now post-pandemic, post-lockdown? When everybody is back at home, when the schools are closed, when the colleges are closed, when everything is supposed to go online, what will happen now? Will the parity continue? Or will we see new kinds of differences? If there is only one phone in the home and there are boys and girls both in need of it, who is going to get access to that phone? Right? We have to think here very, very carefully. I don't know what Ravenshaw's plans are for the coming academic year, but all universities are in turmoil over how to move forward. Most of them are deciding to go online. But have we thought through the repercussions of going online when in fact there are going to be huge differences, class differences, rural-urban differences, but probably also gender differences? Are we going to see the advantages of having sent girls to school, of girls wanting to go to college? Are we going to see a rollback on those advantages? So that's my second question. My third is in the realm of work, and I'm sure there will be speakers who will say a great deal more about work. We realized long before the pandemic struck that we are amongst the lowest work participation. When it comes to women, we have the lowest work participation rates for women in the world. Only West Asian countries like Saudi Arabia have worse data than we do. All right. So in a context in India where work itself is a major source, it's probably the single biggest source of inequality in our country. Barely 10% of men enjoy regular work with a decent wage. The remaining 90% are in various kinds of informal work with irregular sources, casual work, self-employed work, and so on, eking out an existence. This is the story for men. But when we come to women, the story is even worse. Barely 5% of the tiny proportion of women who get any kind of paid work, only 15% of women in our country women are working. Women are working from early morning till late at night. More women work than men do. But in terms of pay, in terms of paid work, a tiny proportion of women receive some kind of pay, whether in the form of a wage, whether in form of some kind of a self-employed kind of return. Only 15% receive anything. And worst of all, most shocking of all, these figures have been getting worse in the last decades. We are in the surprising situation. No other country has this situation of having globalized, of having enlarged our economic strength, of having expanded in so many ways. But in that very context, our employment rates for women have actually been declining. And the degree of decline has been sharpening. So the most recent data, and I'm sure Ishita and others will speak on this, the most recent data are showing not just gradual declines, but absolute contractions. There has been an absolute contraction, looking at the 2017-18 PLFS survey, an absolute contraction in the total number of women workers. This is unprecedented. And we're talking 2017-18. So losses have been part of the Indian story from before. The greatest losses have been in rural areas amongst the less educated. Small proportions of the better educated in urban India, small, I'm repeating small, enjoy some measure of economic security, in better off jobs. But even in urban India, the largest proportion of women workers are primary school teachers and paid domestic workers. These are the two largest categories of work. Then you have some construction workers, then you have people in media and finance, and the BPOs and so on are small proportions. So I think the question that can be posed and will be discussed by other speakers is, what then will happen? If this is the story before the lockdown, before the pandemic struck, what do we imagine is going to happen after? So I now turn over my thoughts to others. I hope you will pick up some of these concerns, and so that we can think collectively and be as prepared as possible for what we will have to deal with, what challenges are unfolding in front of us, and what we must do to prevent the worst kinds of gender disparities and disasters from befalling us. Thank you very much.
Yes, madam, the impact varies from case to case. There is class difference, there is caste difference, there is gender difference. And yes, you rightly observed that the situation we are experiencing now is more than that of a curfew, than a mere health crisis. Thank you, madam. Now I invite our next resource person, Professor Ishita Mukhopadhyay, to deliver her webinar lecture. Thank you, madam. Ishita, madam. Yes.
Is there, but
Can you hear me?
Yeah, madam. We can hear you. We can see you.
Yes. Yeah. So I can't hear anything. That's the problem. I think at my end in this, there is the network problem, but I checked all networks. Anyway, shall I begin? So I didn't hear your announcement. I only saw Mary's lips. That's it. So and I can't even see or shame poor connection. So let me begin by acknowledging the fact that if you take COVID-19, try to take the situation with pre-COVID-19 situation. What was there pre-COVID-19? And I will be discussing only with respect to women's work. Because work, I think, has labor and work, I think, will be a reflection of all kinds of effects, all kinds of dimensions that would pertain. So if we talk about labor, then pre-COVID-19 situation, the official records, official statistics that were registering a record fall in India's employment, and India's female employment was already going down, and it was already in the downward trend, and it was already falling. So the female employment, even within the formal sector, it was already falling. But what we saw in the COVID-19, the vulnerability has increased, no doubt. But India's COVID-19 scenario will be remembered and recorded in history by the historical march of the migrants to their homelands. If you look at the picture, this imagery will be recorded imagery in the documentation of COVID scenario in India. This has become historical documentation that they had to walk to their homeland across the rail tracks, and they were run over by train. Sanitizer was sprayed upon them, and the imagery that rotis were there on the train tracks. This has been hitting us, and women had to deliver their babies on the road. Who were these women? They have been portrayed in the media and in many places as wives of the migrant workers. But they are themselves workers. They are the women migrant workers. And although migration was recognized from 2011 onwards, that women migration, there is a significant amount of migrant labor among the labor force, among the laboring class, but women migrants who were the last to migrate out, this migration is significant. This has increased to a large extent in the last decade. This was invisible. And why we say invisible? Invisible in the official statistics. Now, invisible in the official statistics in the sense that many of them were recorded as circular migration. That is, those who return back to their villages. But as we can see, that they became visible with COVID-19. This was in March, after this lockdown was announced within 4 days, 4 hours, sorry, not 4 days, 4 hours. This 4 hours lockdown has been kept them walking down their homelands. Some interviews have come up, and one of the interviews, I would just refer to one of the interviews, is that the women were telling that when we went out for work, we expected that there is uncertainty, there is risk, something bad might happen, but this is the worst that has happened to us. When we were coming back, all kinds of abuse, the sexual abuse, physical abuse, and humiliation. So what else is bad for us? We are now prepared for anything bad or worse. So this is a phenomena which is to be recorded. Now, what is happening now? This was in March, April, but what has happened now? Just when we were having this webinar, we were talking about, we talked about reverse migration, that is coming back to their homeland. Women also came back to their homeland in the villages. And what is happening now? They are going back. In many cases, women are not going back. So what are we going to see when the 2021 census will be coming? We find we will be recording, ironically, increased households with the. Why? Because it is risky, an uncertain world. So men are migrating. So they have starting the whole process of migration in a new way. So they are going back, but women are not going now. Now, what are these women doing? What did they expect to do? They will be expecting to do agricultural work. So there will be female-headed households again. They will be recording. We expect. The expectation is that what we can expect is that an increase in the supply, increase in the migration to the rural to urban migration within the same state, a kind of circular migration within a day. That is, they come to the city for a day, do the work, and then go back to the village because there's simply no work in the village. What would happen? What has COVID-19 led us to? What kind of life, what kind of vulnerability this has led into? This will be looking into women as pushed down out of the work, but the social reproduction of labor will be going on because there will be more and more workload for them in home-based workers in the non-farm sector, rural non-farm sector, RNFS. Is there work? No, but they will be putting in labor in expectation of return. So they will try to put in those labor. And there has been a recorded increase in suicides, increase in violence in public places for women. So will the women react? How will this happen? How will this reaction goes? None of these most of these has not been recorded. They didn't go to police stations. They didn't go to the for a diary. They didn't go. One is that there was a lockdown. They couldn't go to their homes, to the safety homes, or to the organizations who could help them. But the other alarming part is that they were deprived from minimum standards of living, the minimum quality of life, which is ensuring them a decent livelihood. They are already living indecently. They have already undergone these. So, recalling the incident in Tamil Nadu village of Kamla, the Adivasi woman who hanged her young daughter, and then killed her young daughter and then hanged herself. Because there was no work, there was no livelihood, and they went without food. Starvation is leading them to all kinds of work. Even women who were on contractual work in the formal sector were laid off. So they are being pushed down to work in the organized sector. Look at all the vendors who are coming to of severe extent of job losslessness and severe extent of what we can say a pauperization of the female labor force, a total pauperization of the female labor force, including those who have been laid off due to vulnerability. Now, the other factor is this. Yes, am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, madam. Yes.
Yes. So I can't see myself. That's it. Yeah. So the other part of the whole episode is that there is a profession where there is a female stereotyping, that is the domestic workers. There are many areas where there are female stereotyping, that is they were working, the domestic workers. So what has happened to domestic workers? If you look at the way in which the pandemic is being counteracted, one of the ways in which it is counteracted is having an inherent class bias into it. What is the class bias? That is the poor people, the vulnerable people, the people who have been out of jobs. They are carriers of COVID. So they are spreaders, super spreaders, and they will be spreading the disease. So keep them out of the job market. So domestic workers in the first place were kept out. And when the domestic workers were kept out, we had our Prime Minister also telling that pay them their first month's salary, but only it stopped there. The state only stopped there. So what has happened? There have been evidences of several surveys which have been done in many of the cities that 70 to 80
thing. They show you only half a picture because the census asks only one question. Where did you come from? They say, I came from, suppose from Calcutta. Then that means you have migrated. Why have you migrated? I migrated for marriage. So, it does not take into account that women who marry also do work, and that work is not accounted for in the data. The NSSO data, of course, gives certain problems also. So what it leaves us with is what is called as unaccounted women. In our databases, in our studies, what we see is a large number of women who are not there. They are invisible because they are unaccounted. Beside marriage is also the first study that I did in migration was on the migration of women in Odisha and Balangir and Nuapada, where you had family migration. And these are circulatory migration, which is for a short-term season. So when short-term season and family migration take place, usually women are less accounted for even though they are working. They are less paid also in family wages that are given, because wages are not given per individual. Wages are given per family. And usually when the contractors come to you, they tell you, okay, we will give you so much and this much for the woman. So the woman gets much less than what they are. When you go out to work, there is no portage of your social security system. Now the government has announced that their PDS will be given, but till now there has been no PDS, no social security, no health. You cannot carry anything with you. So that means it makes you more vulnerable. Women, especially in the health sector, are much more vulnerable. There is also a very great gender bias that you will see in migration, where women are concerned. Their jobs are not usually decided by them. It is decided either because you are going in a family, so you go to the brick-kilns, or because women are supposed to do particular kind of jobs. They do stitching, embroidery. So when they go for training, and then they are asked to join the garment trade. So this that is there has become a very big. There are two kinds of jobs that are in that you see women in. One is working in the brick-kilns, but also a lot of them are working as government workers, and this is linked to the government program on skill building. Now, where skill building is concerned, the women are usually very, very young, and the kind of work that they do is usually very stereotyped. So you have a stereotype and a gender bias right from the beginning, that this is the kind of job you will do and this is the kind of salary attached to it. Young women who went for a study that I did for ILO on garment manufacturers show that young women are asked to join the garment industry, but not the computer one. And the computers were getting much more higher paid both in Tirupur and Bangalore. Now, this was the kind of background that you can see. There is also one part of migration which very few people talk about, and that is the women-headed household where remittances come. If remittances do not come, as they are not coming now, it leaves a lot of women out of the workforce, out of the visibility that we have, that we are getting. Does not mean that I do not give due work is not done by them. Ishita will be able to tell us that there is so much of rural economy that is that women Okay. Now, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
coming to 19, if with that kind of background that you have where migration is concerned and women's standards and conditions and quality of life are concerned, you will see that there is a little distinct change that we come to COVID-19. I was asked by NDMA to do a guideline for them, and I found that on disaster risk reduction, the same when it came to COVID-19 did not work at all. That means that there has been a tremendous change in meeting the pandemic that is there. Now, where male urban is concerned, there has been a lot of increase in the male where urban to urban is concerned. That is why when Ishita was talking about visualization and where other visualizations are concerned, women are fewer there. Because there has been, you usually saw very young men, and most of them were urban workers who had come from doing jobs in some company or some industry. The young women were missing. Most of the young women either stayed back to come together. They did not take the long walk home or the long marches home. The women who came were mostly, they were in the study that we did recently, were basically, they were either working with families or they had been there for in a chain agreement for a long, long time. Now, and so they had those headloads that you could see and that they were walking. Now, where one of you mentioned also violence. Violence is part of our life as women, but in COVID-19, there was a new kind of violence that was seen. This violence was not only where they started, it was on the road, in the accommodation that women found, in the hotels where they stayed, in the dhabas where they ate, on the streets that they walked. There was violence across the whole walk that they came from the sending area to the from the receiving area to the sending area. They also had violence faced in many of the quarantine centers. And in check gates, for the first time, India has now borders between states. So these borders have checkposts, and at every checkpost, there is always a violence against women that could be seen. Now, there were no one-stop centers to report to. There were no protection officers. For a long time, we have been telling the government that please make, where protection officers are concerned, tell them to make it that they are independent and not the CDPOs, etc. in many of the states who are there. So when they were there, the CDPOs were busy. There were no one to report to. They could not walk, as someone said, about the FIRs that were launched. Where the economy was concerned, though for both Mary and Ishita have talked about the loss of jobs and tremendous lots of jobs that was there. There is another thing attached to it, Ishita. When you talked about assets, there is women who have been selling off their assets. What are the assets that women have? Usually it is a little money, but it is also the gold that your mother gives you or you might have bought. So a lot of gold is being uploaded onto the market by women because they do not have the money to come home, or when they came home, they do not have jobs, so they needed money to eat. So beside the assets that they are losing, there's also a beginning of selling of land. Land alienation has already started in large way in some of the studies that we did in 2 or 3 states recently. So that leaves women open. If you are assetless, it leaves you open to exploitation. There is also low nutrition. So if you have low nutrition and you have a workplace and you have no access to food, or if there is what some reports mention, only 60% women had access to food, 60% did not have access to food, then it becomes a critical issue because this is the season when agriculture is starting. So if you are malnutrition and you do not have, you're not healthy enough to go into the farmlands to work, naturally then nutrition plays a large part in your lives. So this is another thing. The other thing that has come in many of the states, in mine, of course, in Chhattisgarh we have seen, in Jharkhand we have seen that malaria eradication programs have stopped. So in all those state and districts where there is rampant malaria and there is no program in place, there is no immunization of children, the health, we are going to face now what is called a health disaster, complete disaster after this, beside the economic disaster. Now, the social security that is supposed to help you was offered to domestic workers. They were given 500 rupees as social security. What do you get with 500 rupees? Not even an LPG cylinder can come for 500 rupees. So this, and if you talk about free cylinders, maybe 1 or 2 a year that is given, and that had also stopped, and one of the reasons why the Jharkhand elections were fought on LPG cylinders. So these are things that have carried on and is also something that is still happening. So in that, under those conditions, what do? We have no law on migration. The migration law that is there, one law that is there, the Migrant Workers Act, does not include women. So where women are concerned, we don't have a legal framework for law. So that is the first thing, and that is something that will have to be looked into. They have spent so much on health that health expenditure has ruined many of them, because when they came into quarantine centers with positive and they went home, the expenditure still continued. Social security is not there for all of them. There is also domestic violence is excluded, but there is one hope which was there. I don't know if the government will even look at it, and that is the Forest Right Act, which said that where land was concerned, it could be redistributed to marginalized people, especially where tribal women are concerned, if the Adivasis are concerned. So, we have to take those on board. Some of the issues that have been not looked into for a long time. And if you see men going back to work, they have already, the march back has started, and women not going back, the workload increases, the expenses are increased. They don't have remittances. So that means they have to carry the village economy on their shoulders. It is because men are leaving. So these are the kind of issues I think that are there in migration. I leave you with this. It is a depressing situation, but I think we can together fight this kind of situation, not alone, but maybe with solidarity with each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam. As you rightly pointed out, violence constitutes an integral component of women's lives, and violence is omnipresent. It is there in bus, inside train, inside police station, in dhabas, in schools, in educational institutions. Even quarantine centers have been no exceptions. Thank you, madam. Now we request Professor Vibhuti Patel, a practicing gender expert in Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, to deliver her webinar lecture. Vibhuti, madam.
Thank you very much. I superannuated from Tata Institute after completing 65 years on June. But still, I'm associated in so far as the MPhil and PhD program is concerned. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Ashima Sahu and Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Ishan Kumar Patru, for giving me this opportunity. And I also greet Professor Ishita Mukhopadhyay, Professor ASHA Hans, Dr. Mary John, Dr. Vikram Mishra, and Kumar Patru, all the participants, students and teachers. It is after very in-depth presentations examining different dimensions of gender impact on of coronavirus on the Indian society, Indian economy. I think I would like to highlight some of the issues, and I would complement what my previous three speakers have said. and also, luckily all of us are on the same wavelength so far as the sensitivity and sensibility is concerned, so it makes it easier. First issue that I would like to take up is that working from home, the kind of stress which has increased, because everybody in the family, whether they have a business or they are unemployed or they are working from home, has made massive, like a multiple task for women has become a norm, and it's more intensified. There are multiple demands on women. And the adolescent girls in the family, whether they are in college or school, there is a lot of surveillance happening. In fact, most of the panic calls I have received beyond that. So all the complaints of non-wage payment, brutality at the workplace, and also the news, unpaid wages, all those issues should be covered by and this labor helpline should be in regional languages, but there should be exclusive helpline only for the pregnant women, for the reproductive health needs of women, and it should be treated as an essential service. Universal basic income is a global demand. Even the economists who were very much sold to the neoliberal logic, they have also started talking about the universal basic income. The computations are varying, like Dr. Mahendra Dev, IGIDR, and the RBI governor, they say that it should be 4,500 rupees. Feminist groups and the gender experts are talking that it should be 7,500 minimum support that should be given. And the last but most important is that respect for human rights protocols, which India is signatory to, because there is a gross violation at the ground level. And I think we have to train our criminal justice system, our governance structures, and political bodies about the respect for, under the cloak of coronavirus and under the garb of COVID emergency, you just can't do away with the human rights. So democratic governance, transparency, respect for human rights are as important as fighting against COVID virus. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, madam. As you rightly said, yes, there is a surge and increase in the violence against women and the culture of violence. And what aggravates, what worsens the situation is when it is supported by digital technology and they use social media to intensify their activities of violence. And your comments on the cynicism with which patients are treated, COVID-19 patients are treated in hospitals, were indeed heart-wrenching. Thank you, madam. The value of an event increases when the final words are given by the leader of the organization. Yes, we have our ultimate mentor, motivator with us, our esteemed Vice Chancellor, Professor Ishan Kumar Patra. I humbly request our esteemed Vice Chancellor to deliver his presidential address for this August event. Sir.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Professor ASHA Hansji, Professor Vibhuti Patel, Professor Ishita Mukhopadhyay, Professor Mary John, Professor Asima Sahu, Professor Vikram Kesari Mishra. I see quite a few very senior participants over there, all respected participants. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be a Vice Chancellor, but very difficult to really exist as a Vice Chancellor. You have to speak anything, everything, anywhere, everywhere. I don't know, I may be trying to make a little justice to the lectures that are given by such learned people on the subject. But I've been asked to say something I must say. All the four dignitaries have really spoken too good about the scenario, and it's very alarming, not today, it's alarming forever, that not only India, all over the world, the human population as such from the day of the conception of idea of living together, the men has always been doing all the things that the women do not like. I'm pretty sure what has been spoken is correct, and I support all the views that have been given there. And I have some observations which are a little away from what has already been discussed, because I'm a biologist, I am a medical scientist. So I would like to see this through a medical perspective. What we have come to in another webinar where this gender was also an issue, it was organized by History Department. I spoke a few things that I will repeat again because most of the participants to this seminar would not have attended that. What has happened in COVID is we know by now that the men is more affected by COVID than the women. The reason for that are many, but to give you a little bit of semi-statistical, semi-quantitative information, the fatality ratio is death rate. The death rate is more in male than the female. The city of Wuhan, where this COVID started, the very first data came from there with the gender differentiation is telling us that 2.4 times more of male patients died as compared to the women. But now there has been a correction in that. Earlier they said less number of women came for reporting, but what we are getting now is it's almost equal number of male and female reported with the infection, but large number of male died. The severities also are more all over the world. Now the European data and American data also suggest that the male are suffering more when they come to this infection than the female. God has been great, and we understand in medical science also that the mechanisms in a woman is more towards repair than in a male. So the repair mechanism is faster and better in a female body than the male body, and that we can see, and we can see in this data it is happening there. And the innate immunity is also more in the women than in the men. So this is helping. But what is alarming is the WHO as early as 14th May said that this pandemic is bringing in a raise in the number of violence against women and children, and it is increasing faster in lockdown. And the access to sexual and reproductive health and health rights of the women is also getting diminished because we have got limited amount of medical benefits and medical facilities which are getting accommodated or getting occupied by the pandemic patients, leading to a situation where the women are suffering. The point being, a day of delivery or day of birth of a child will not differ. The pregnancy period cannot be extended just because there is a pandemic happening there. So what should have been taken care of, which has never been taken care of in all these pandemic issues, is that the maternity homes should not have been at any point of time converted into COVID centers. And this has been done all over the world. So there have been social and health workers who are largely women. And of course, now people have, after a while, people became very careful about that, and we started giving all types of positive protective gears to the women and men both. But the point is that health givers or caregivers are more of them are women than the men. So the workforce there in the front, in the medical point of view, are the women. So we have to be, we should have been, we have to be, and we continue to be more careful in that front. I have a paper from Lancet. Lancet, if I have to tell the people from social sciences, Lancet is the #1 reporting journal for medical sciences. So a paper in Lancet or Nature, they're all considered to be equal, and they are very important papers, and then they have never been challenged on this earth. So it's a recent paper I have got on my hand, which speaks a lot about this women harassment part of it, and how this pandemic has been more responsible for reversing whatever we did in terms of gender equity. What it says, the UN Secretary General said in last month, he said that COVID-19 could reverse the limited progress that has been made on gender equality and women rights. That's very alarming. When UN Secretary admits this, that becomes a question and that becomes an issue that has to be addressed very carefully by all the governments all over the world. Now, what is more important now to think is that, as all the four speakers have said, the infection versus infect versus affect. The person who is right comes back home, but what has affected the family or what has affected the population where the infection has occurred is something that is not quantitated, because we are more into saving lives than looking into other part of it. So it is very important now that things are getting settled a bit, and now that the kind of infection that we are used to, the rigorance of or the severity of the infection and number of deaths we used to have has gone down. Now it is time that we should also start thinking about not only infection, not only the infect part of it, the affect part of it should also be considered very carefully. And the affect part of it is actually what is being discussed today. Who is affected most in such pandemic situations? See, in all over the world, more so in India, we consider the male is a earning hand. He is working from home. He's doing a great job, isn't it? He's staying back home and working. He used to go out and work, but now see, he's staying home and working and creating more of trouble perhaps. But all the jokes we get in the WhatsApp, we always listen to it. It's not working from home, it has become working at home. And working at home is helping the wife, and working from home is earning the money. And I do not know how big a challenge it is for the male persons, but it has already become a big challenge for the women race. Why so? Because now we are seeing that it says we have about 740 million women who are working into formal and informal mode of job, more in informal and less informal mode of jobs in the world population. And I'm sorry, it's 740 million is only informal mode of jobs amongst the women in all over the country, world. Now you multiply it, or maybe multiply it several times, which is a formal mode of work that the women force is doing. What is happening now? Lockdown is, now that I have got my learned professor, all of them are ladies. Excuse me if I am wrong anywhere. But what happens to a lady who is working? She has got a dual personality. Till 9 in the morning, she is a mother, a wife, and a lady. Getting herself ready for the job, which starts after 10 or after 9. But till 9, she does everything. But at 10, she forgets the rest of it. Now she becomes a worker, is equal to a gentleman, comes to the workforce. We may go on discussing on it, whether she gets that equity there or not. But to her, she is equal to any other person in the workforce. She comes to the work, stays there till 5:30, 6, 6:30, 7, and back home again to become a mother, a wife, and a lady. What has happened in lockdown is, she does it all through. She is a wife, she is a mother, she is a lady, and a worker also sitting in home. And what is also adding to that is the pressure of not getting out of those troubles, or whatever I may use the word, quote unquote, troubles of home, staying in home, looking into those troubles alongside the work. This is a very different and difficult scenario. I cannot understand this as a male person, but all the females are suffering this. And what has come to now is the lockdown actually has bogged down all the females, and they are really in trouble in understanding where are they. Are they workers? Are they officers or managers or executives, or they are the same housewife and mother, but they're doing the rest of it again. And what we have come to understand in corporate sector is the workload has really gone up, because nobody sees them working. They only command a work, not understanding what is going through it. So all the people forgot on this earth to say that a woman working from home should have a little less work as compared to a male working from home. And I would say anybody working from home should have less work as compared to what he was doing working from his workplace. Because workplace is an isolated place. When you're working from home, you've got everything else. Your family, your children, your TV, your telephone, your visitors, or of course visitors are not coming here, but all the noise of home, all the noise of neighborhood, everything is there, minus the working environment where he is confined to a working room and doing his job. In addition to that, there are other issues which needs to be considered, is that the men in all over the world has been understood to have more of the comorbidities, like the rate of higher rates of obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and lung diseases are compared to the women. Barring a few countries where the women smoke more than the men, major countries we have found that women have almost stopped smoking. Smoking anyway has gone down all over the world. But it is true that the comorbidities are more in men than in the women. The pandemic actually is deepening the pre-existing inequalities, exposing vulnerabilities in social, political, and economic systems, which are in turn amplifying the impacts of the pandemic as such. So it is not only the COVID-19 virus that is causing a trauma in the mind and existing of human being, but it is also, there are also other issues which has now become a part and parcel of the pandemic panic, and this panic is really becoming too difficult now. And almost every country has also come to think about it now, that we are no more saying it is a lockdown, we say unluck as a psychological treatment for a person. But if you go on saying you are locked down, you may be bogged down. So we say you have unlocked you, but still the lockdown continues. Like Friday evenings in Orissa are traumatic evenings because everybody goes out, because Saturday and Sunday they cannot go out and do anything else. So I have got serious questions on this. Are we really going to lock down for 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, or we are having enough of exposure on Friday evening, which is good enough to sleep for Saturday and Sunday, not cause any more infections or any more contamination during that time? And now UN has also cautioned that a lot of women who have escaped extreme poverty are at risk of falling back, because those who are in extreme poverty, they came for informal work and their work has gone now. My daughter in Mumbai said there's no household help available in Mumbai, because all those people who were doing household jobs have left Mumbai because they had nothing to do there. No food, no shelter, nothing. They've just left. And now the question comes, are they willing to come back to you? No, I don't think they will be willing to come back to you. And even if they come back to you, will they be getting the same salary, same honor, same respect or not, is again a big question to be asked. And then in terms of doing one thing, Indian government has done a great thing. That's the money transfer that we did for the poor, and hats off to our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi ji and his team. What we have been able to do is we have been able to do a few things which UN started asking later on, but our government had already done it. But one more thing that they are asking is now that this money should not be transferred to the men of the house. This money should be transferred to the women of the house. I now remember of one thing. One afternoon, I found one of my class 4 employees drunk with a very expensive dog, moving around and acting like Amitabh Bachchan. He said, "I'm Amitabh Bachchan of Ravensa." So what I did is I suspended him, and I wrote on that suspension order that the money will be transferred to his wife's account, not to his account as salary. And because he is not a very influential person, everybody forgot that his suspension has to be revoked also. Then when I came to know after 2 months that his suspension has not been revoked, and I found out that the wife came to tell me, "Sir, you may give his job back, but the money should come to my account, because this helps me in asking him to have little less alcohol as compared to what he has been doing." So putting money into the women's hand is perhaps one of the things that we need to learn during this pandemic time. I do it. I don't know what is my basic salary. My wife knows it better. And the other thing that has come to, I think one of our speakers did made a mention of it. What has become very difficult now is the girls not going to the school has become a serious vulnerable issue for the girls. What we have felt that girls are for girls, schools are possibly safe environments. Many people may not know this, may not even accept this, but this is true, and my learned professors in the subject would agree with me that the schools are possibly one of the escape points for the girls from the vulnerability or the kind of tortures they get. What is being felt now, and the reports coming now, the teenage pregnancy and unwanted pregnancy has become more now worldwide. I'm so much confused that during pandemic time, people have been collecting all kinds of data, and such kind of data somebody will collect during COVID time. I never knew that what has happened is the number of those unreported, malpractices, or you can say unreported. If I use the common word that people use on unreported rapes going on, has become more as compared to what it was happening in pre-pandemic time. Because the pandemic time, there's nobody coming and asking nowhere you go and complain about things also. And what has come up more is for the girls, they are more put to domestic duties now for taking care of the children who are younger to them, or preparing food at home and doing other things rather than reading books or doing their studies from home. So studies from home is another thing which is for boys only. It may not be for girls in all the places. Any particular economic level below that, they will be like that only. And what is more important now, one of my speakers said that if these online classes goes on, then there will be issues where the family has got one connectivity, the boy will be preferred better than the girl to go for that class. Let's say boys should read first and then the girl will go for a class. By that time, the online class is already over. If there is one smartphone to share amongst the people in a house, it usually goes to the boys who are little elder. Even the father may not get it. But definitely the girls in the family will get it only after he gets tired of using that smartphone. So if you are talking in terms of online education, talking in terms of education through technology modes, there are serious issues that people should ask about the girl child, about the girl student in places where things are not available, or places where economic conditions do not permit them to have an equal exposure, beneficiary as far as using the technology available at home or at the place of work or at the place of... In a village also, if there is a community television, people would not prefer to listen to that teaching that is coming in television, which is essentially required for the girl child. They will be better going for Ramayana or anything else. What now needs is more of a serious concern today is immediately after this pandemic, what we will see is the impact of malnutrition and undernutrition, particularly in children and the mothers. It has been a general weakness of all the ladies to feed the chief of the family more than feeding themselves. So malnutrition, neonatal malnutrition, postnatal malnutrition is something that does not come during pregnancy. It comes before even perceiving the idea of getting pregnant. So all those teenage girls and all those expecting mothers or the mother-to-be who are just married or something like that, who are waiting to become mothers, are the people who have to be taken care of as far as nutrition is concerned. Otherwise, what will happen is these 5, 6, 7 months of malnutrition will be good enough to cause all kinds of damage to the neonates that are there, the fetus and then the neonates, and or I should say perinatal age points of the child. So there are millions and millions of people around a single ward that we have used the pandemic, and this has to be a serious concern, both the medical front and at the equity front also. I must thank Asima for conceiving this idea of having this webinar, and I must thank all the speakers who found out time from the very, very busy schedule and be with us and tell us in depth the scenario now and the way we have to face this. I'm extremely happy about it. But before I close down, I must say that there is never a beginning and there is never an end as far as respecting the mother or the women is concerned. It's always there, it will be there. But the only thing is that we have to hammer sometimes when it is going out of our mind and brain. We have to make people be
reproductive and sexual healthcare services such as pregnancy care and other services during pandemic. And then Ishita madam. Ishita madam, how does corona impinge upon tribal women? Then another point to Ishita madam. It is seen many women are migrating from their workplace permanently to family to take care of household activities in the absence of maid, domestic maid. Domestic maids have gone. Is there any way for the government to intervene? Anything can be done so that these women can retain their livelihood. This is happening mostly in urban areas. Another, it is seen that during pandemic, in the policy formation, women are not taken as an integral component in the decision-making process. It is observed. How can women be made an integral component of the decision-making process during pandemic? Another question to Ishita madam. Why did we fail this time in pandemic? Why were we not prepared for this pandemic? And to ASHA madam, can you have data on how many women have sold their gold and land and other assets during pandemic? Vibhuti madam, lockdown has prevented women from protecting their assets, including land. They have been victims of untold atrocities even by the state. How can this situation be balanced? And second, women do not constitute a homogeneous group. They are a heterogeneous group. Don't you think problems vary from women to women? And don't you think there is an urgent need for target-specific approach? And one common question, it is not addressed to any resource person. Why is it that countries with female leaders have performed worse than the countries with male leaders in COVID management? We will go start the same series. First, Professor Mary June will speak, then Ishita madam, then ASHA madam, and then Vibhuti madam.
Thank you for these questions. I would like to, but before sort of trying to respond to them, I think we need to be a little cautious on a couple of fronts. One is that while I have been very, very happy to see the extent to which there has been such a strong response from civil society and on the part of, the world of academics and scholars has come out with responses to a whole host of issues raised by the pandemic. As a researcher, I do think we need to be a little aware of the constraints under which we are now making our claims. We are making our claims, the researches that are being undertaken, whether in the first world or whether in our context, are being undertaken under extraordinary constraints. So I would not take any of the studies that are being done now as the final word. Even the pandemic itself is unfolding and changing its face as we go along. So the fact that we have all, and so please bear with us when, of course, we may say things are getting reversed. Yes, there are signs of rise in domestic work, the domestic violence, but let us be a little cautious. When I saw some of the questions, they're asking for data and so on. I would say be a little cautious here. Ask yourselves, when there was no COVID, when there was no pandemic, under what conditions did we do our data? Under what conditions did we do research? How much time did it not take us to come out with our results? So please do not expect that suddenly now Under these conditions, where we don't even have access to the field, we are going to come out with robust results about the status of anything. Domestic violence is, for instance, the most difficult subject to study. Violence per se is the most difficult subject to study. When the National Family Health Survey gives us data, for instance, on domestic violence, it is very problematic data. We have to be very careful how we interpret that data. If that data tells us that all the poor families and all the scheduled caste families are, the women of those families are, suffering violence, domestic violence, and no middle class families are suffering domestic violence, I would raise a big question mark in terms of the validity and the nature of such data. Who is going to answer you questions about violence? Who is in a position to raise their voice about violence? All right, whether be middle class, whether be working class. So please, I would request many of us to be a little cautious and careful about what we are saying. What we are indicating are trends. What we are indicating are the voices that get through to us. It is NGOs in the field who probably have relationships to the fields that they're working with and such that they're able to get responses. But I know about studies where, for instance, they found that only those who had a smartphone that was working condition were able to get answers to their questions. Half the people they were interacting with had no phones in the first place, and a remaining proportion of those, their phones were no longer able to. The payment of the charge was no longer functioning, and so there was no answer to be obtained. So all our data now is highly biased, highly provisional, and should be taken in that spirit. All right. So the other thing is, please I know there's a lot of goodwill amongst people who are raising questions. The problems we are with are gigantic. Do not expect a quick fix solution. Do not expect one little policy by the government is going to solve the problems of malnutrition, is going to solve. Let us first recognize the extent of the problem. Let us recognize how much of goodwill will be required. Let us recognize that, in fact, state action so far has already been part of the problem. We already have a situation where half our children are malnourished, long before the pandemic came along. So why was that the case in the first place? What was wrong with ICDS programs in the first place? Unless we have a diagnosis of the prior problem, we will not come any closer to finding a solution. So, these are my concerns. Disparity in income. Somebody's asking about, please understand the extent to which disparity in income is a worldwide phenomenon, that women are paid less for the same amount of work, right? We now have a constitution that mandates equal treatment, equal pay. Why is that not able to translate into practice? Please have some sense of those issues so that when we are under pandemic conditions, we can find a slightly better lever to be able to address those things. I think one of the interesting questions that came was a general question to everyone, was about female leadership. And one saw pictures of, Merkel in Germany and the New Zealand, the woman in New Zealand, and the fact that they seem to be doing so much better than several other men. I think let us be a little cautious here too. We are very, very, very small numbers of women leaders in the world. Very small compared to the vast majority. I don't know if there are even 5% of nations in the world have a female head of government. Ask yourselves, what does it take to become a head of a government in the current moment? The good reasons might be that they actually have the welfare of people at heart, and therefore they are going to implement policies. I can say this is true of Merkel. It is possibly true, it is certainly true of the New Zealand Prime Minister, that they are already welfare oriented, and hence their thinking is even more sharpened at a time like the pandemic. But please, in recent history, we have had women leaders. We've had Aquino in the Philippines. We've had Margaret Thatcher in England. These are women leaders, but they have by no means had the welfare of the citizens at heart. They have been the ones who have introduced some of the most authoritarian, some of the most gender unfriendly, some of the most inegalitarian policies that we have ever seen. So I would really again ask you, do not have a simplistic notion of an innate gender quality that translates into positive gender outcomes. Even in our own, we could even look in our own country. some of our chief ministers and so on. I think the best state in India today, as far as COVID is concerned, is Kerala. There is no two ways about it. Kerala was well prepared thanks to prior experience and has done an extremely good job even today. And it is unfortunately a state where we haven't seen women leaders. I would like to see more women leaders in this state. I come from Kerala and it has been male leadership. But at least that male leadership has shown good leadership during this moment, even if there could have been women. And it has also delegated. This male leadership in Kerala has delegated to others. It has delegated to its health minister, for instance, Shailaja. It has delegated to the Kudumbashree women at the very bottom of the system. And they have been in a position to actually act in a way that could make a difference. So I think we need a much more nuanced way of thinking about the problems we face, our capacity to diagnose those problems, and what it would take to make a difference. Thanks very much.
Thank you, madam. Ishita, madam.
Yes, as I couldn't hear your question, so I'm now being able to hear, but I was just looking into the chat box. I want to pick up 2-3 questions which have been raised in the chat box. Putting other questions around that. One is the very pertinent question of land, that what is happening to land. During these phases, what we find that some are, most of the women, most of the population are losers, but we can also identify that there are some gainers in the society also in the pandemic. Who are the gainers? There are some companies who are taking over forest lands, who are converting forest lands to companies, and who are acquiring. There have been acquisition of land and forest lands at very low prices, and which it is the what we call the frustrated way to sell. We call it distress, but it is distress as well as frustration. The frustrated way to sell off to whatever prices they get. So this distress sale of forest land, distress sale of land is reorienting the whole land dynamics and land and class relations with respect to women. And this is not the beginning. It was there, but now it is going off in a large scale. So that is adding to my point of indebtedness. That is going to my point, which I refer to indebtedness. There has been a growing indebtedness due to the pandemic. So this is one of the issues which I like to raise at this point of time. And we clearly, as Mary rightly stated, that we clearly do not have all the data regarding this. In fact, one of questions have been raised regarding the sale of ornaments also. What we saw in the demonetization, some of the demonetization effects on women are being visible now in the pandemic, that there has been a sale of ornaments also. There has been a sale of whatever valuables women held up. This was the reserve which women used to have, which they would release under any kind of financial stress, any kind of devastation of the family. So they are adding to all of this. So some of the demonetization effects are also visible with respect to women here. So women selling ornaments, we really don't have data to that. And women, in the plight of the women in the informal sector, there is the ISS survey has been referred to. There are lots of studies being coming up also. But what I'm going to point out here is the fact that regarding the very low wages and the abnormal conditions of the work, the kind of the work conditions with which the labor is being employed, whatever deplorable conditions are there, whatever exploitative rules are there, it is being employed now. So will that become the norm of the new normal? That is the anxious query that I'm putting out here. That I don't go by the word of new normal, but because pre-COVID was not quite a normal situation as far as the condition of the women laborers are concerned. So it was already, we were discussing these problems earlier. So they were not normal. So I don't go by the word of new normal. So it was not normal, but will that become the norm? The norms and the practices which that have been there, in fact, with the change of the labor codes, with the increase in the number of labor hours from 8 to 12, will that become the norm? That is the anxious query which I'm putting to. And the third issue which I like to flag off, which has been rightly raised in the chat box I saw, is that women are not homogeneous. Yes, they form across the caste class plurality is there, and what we see, the attack against the Dalit Adivasi women have been very much visible during these periods, during the pandemic. The story that I started, the story that I referred to is the Mangala story. She's an Adivasi in the Tamil Nadu village, and Mangalas are there throughout India. So this caste, class, plurality, this discrimination which was there was reinstated. Again, the anxious query, will that become the norm even after that? Will that be a norm? If it is a norm of this quote-unquote new normal, will that become the norm? So these are some of the questions which were raised in the chat box, and I'm responding to those. If there are any others, I'll be free to interact, but I think we are running out of time as the time scheduled here. You can get me and through emails, and we can interact for further interactions. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. ASHA, madam.
Yeah. I think Ishita has answered the question that was asked of me. What I would like to say at this point of time is that when I started to do some interviews, I started with a disability group. And the first thing that they said on domestic violence was, ma'am, please don't ask me that question. I will tell you when I meet you in person. Because the phone, it does not belong to her. Out of 100, only 2 women had Android phones. And this phone belonged to the family. They were within the house. So there are certain things that you cannot ask at certain point of time of the pandemic. Because most of the time we have to call them, or if you know someone who's on the ground, whether the panchayat sarpanch or there is someone. So one of the things that as women studies scholars we need to do is to look at the methodology of how we are collecting and what data we are collecting. It is not at this point of time the questions that we are asking, but what is the methodology that we use in the collection of data? The second thing that we have to do is, and which Ishita mentioned, was the intersectionality. Every woman is not the same. There are differences between the women who are, in fact, one of the issues that came up when I was doing the study was that where women was concerned, men were getting better jobs in the urban areas, and we were just told that the education of women was increasing. The women had so much of education. Why is it that when they went to urban migrants, women were there, they did not get jobs? So these are the things that we need to ask. Why is it happening? What is the methodology that we are using? What are the intersectionalities that are there? Whether they are Adivasi women or whether they are Dalit women or LGBTQ or disabled women. We need to break that down in that. And then if you have to ask about gold and land, I think the question should be to whom was it sold? Who are the people who during a pandemic are buying things? So the questions need to be also set in the parameters of what we are facing, the tragedy that is facing, that some people can still go ahead and mop up the whatever there is from poor people, and that there is still a very big gap about the problems that they are facing and what we are providing them with. Not only NGOs, it's the work of the government to also provide to see that these issues do not come up. So all of us together, whether as academics we look at it, or whether as NGOs, or whether as government, we have to, our role should be to see that how do we benefit the people whom we are working with, and how do we do that. And I think this is a good time for us to look at research methodologies and to see how these, some of the issues will keep coming for the next 20 years, I'm sure. People will still be asking, who did what, why did they do it, what happened to the women? You know, these issues will, because these are not easy to solve. These are not easy to get answers to, but we still need to go ahead and do what we are doing. And I'm thankful to Ashima and to the Vice Chancellor for giving this opportunity, and also an opportunity to listen to Ishita, Mary, and Vibhuti, because you get different perceptions, different views, and most of us, I think, hopefully covered a lot of space today.
Thank you, madam. Vibhuti, madam.
Yeah. See, along with the land and gold being sold to it, in Western India, you can say even private microfinance institutions, they were also very predatory and behaved like mercenary. So I think we need a regulation about them. In the cities, we saw that it was people left everything, like 32% of reverse migration which took place was of women. Either they were wives or home-based workers or workers in their own right. But they left everything, including utensils, furniture, cooking gas, everything. And that was purchased by their own neighbors who were the local residents. So in a city like Mumbai, it was a local versus outsider. No, that was, and that has been there for a long time in Bombay. Bombay has a strong history of local. So the local people also bought, local money lenders also took it. So I think the assetlessness among the migrating people, that was created as a result. Another thing, that whole question of women not being homogeneous, yes, we accept that there are intersectionalities, and our intervention should also be informed by the specific situation. So whatever you are suggesting for the vegetable vendors or home-based workers or handloom workers or fisher folks, you have to understand the reality, and the intervention strategy has to come up. And that's why I think some of the rapid assessment studies, I fully don't agree with what Mary John has said, that the data can't be trusted, because I know of the community-based organizations or NGOs or trade unions or SHGs, Anganwadi trade union, all of them were also, while doing relief work and going to the community, they were also doing the need assessment study. So the micro planning, for example, Vacha is now in the 11th round of relief operation. They provide kits for 10 days. Okay, so they started from 25th March until, and then these students who are actually doing the relief work, they are community based, they also collect the data, so that your relief operation is not, it is targeted. It is the material you have collected, each kit costs you 1,200 rupees. There are 16 items in the relief kit. That is not wasted. So I think even the data generated at a micro level, because of the direct intervention and direct rapport with the community, I think that can also give us some idea of what is happening at the ground level. It can be generalized. What you talk about the slums in Mumbai cannot be said about, say, community in Bhubaneswar. That is true. But I think certain patterns that are very macro level, I think, yeah, what Mary says is correct, that it can be completely trusted.
Thank you, madam. It is indeed a rare privilege to be a part of this stimulating, vibrating, intellectually scintillating discourse on COVID-19 from a gender perspective that dwelt upon a wide range of issues, starting from migration, reproductive health care, livelihood, domestic violence, violence in public space, education, child care, food security, human rights to governance. The entire session was indeed engaging and exciting. With this, I now request the convener of this national webinar, Professor Asima Sahu, to propose the vote of thanks.
She's thrown out.
There's a technical need.
She's there.
The technical issue there. Maybe disconnectivity or something. Actually connecting will take a minute. See, in the meantime, I can say whatever has happened, of course, health is also a very big damage that we have faced, but one good thing has come. We have started using the technology, Holding such a seminar where all these stalwarts to be brought together would have been a very big issue, Finding people together, getting them together at the same time, in the same place. It's really, now it is possible. All four of you would not be meeting us in one place. So, okay, Asima is back.
Okay, so I express my deep sense of gratitude to all our resource persons for today's webinar. I know whenever I just wrote to them, they immediately agreed, and it was such a huge relief for me. And they flagged up such important issues concerning the women and gender, not only during the pre-COVID times, but also during the COVID time. And I'm sure all our young participants, especially those who are doing their undergraduate studies, must have immensely benefited from their perspectives, and it will definitely make them think and critically reflect over these issues, which will definitely sharpen their understanding about the women and gender issues. Once again, I thank all our resource persons on behalf of the university. I also thank our Vice Chancellor immensely, because almost every other day we have a webinar, and he's always more than willing to participate in all these webinars, spending almost 2 to 3 hours every day. So I'm learning from him in this department how to be patient and attend all these webinars. So I also take this opportunity to thank all our faculty members from Ravenshaw as well as from other institutions, and dear participants who have really encouraged us by their participation, and also these several questions they have raised. Once again, I thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for joining this webinar. Thank you very much. Now we declare this webinar closed. Thank you.